welcome back to another audiobook. I'm your host, Keith. Thank you for being here again. It's fun. I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to be reading books for you guys. You know how much we love story time. This one's Kolbrin Bible. It's got correlations of many ancient societies. I'm talking Sumerian, Babylonian, Assyrian, though those are kind of interrelated. Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity. We've got the Great Deluge. We've got two deluges, the floods. We've got the fall from grace. We have people of up high leaving their lands to mingle with the people down low, the party makers, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Basically, we've got a group of people who are like, hey, they're killing it down there, and the gods go, no, dude, I understand, I get it, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, I get it, but don't do it. They're like rotten fruit, let them fall. And it plays out from there. It's great. There's the story of Noah. Even the sword and the stone is in here. So be receptive when listening, but also be discerning, right? We want to make sure that we're discerning with the information that we're taking in. I played some flute in the background to keep it nice and engaging. I have some piano that I put in there to make it give it those nice melancholic feels. So that being said, thanks for being here. Please like the video, comment, subscribe to the channel if you're new. I have a bunch of other audiobooks that I've done. Love you guys. Thanks for being here. I'm your host, Keith, man of letters, knowledge, information, and entertainment. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you guys soon, all right? Enjoy the show. To the promotion of the ideal of true love and the consolidation of families through the fostering of family ethics and traditional moral values, to the furtherance of all things conducive to the betterment of the individual and the advancement of humankind, to the enhancement of the spirit of goodwill inherent in the human race and the preservation of all the qualities from the past, which continue to serve the cause of good. To this end, the sincere efforts of the publishers and distributors and all profits from this book are dedicated. Forward. What is presented in this book is a reproduction of one of several versions which have existed in similar form since World War II, first in handwritten form and then in typewritten. What is given here was never intended for multiple or commercial circulation, and there are valid reasons derived from experience why this should be so. However, believing it to be in the public interest, it has lately been decided that it should be made available now, subject to explicit conditions. As far as it is known, it faithfully follows the authenticated copy of a handwritten version reproduced earlier in this century. This was resurrected in a very dilapidated condition, but has been transcribed fully as found. Undoubtedly, in transmission some personal colorations may have crept in, but the whole, as it stands now with its imperfections, is nevertheless a reliable and validated medium for bringing a body of spiritual truths into concrete being. It is the spirit behind the facade that is all-important factor. The value of what has been salvaged and preserved here is not for the present compilers to determine, research, or edit. Their obligation is seen as being true recorders of what is there. Others, better able, may assess its worth. It is known, however, that some items, which at their face value and in their context seem of little import, contain within themselves something of intrinsic value to the spiritually aware. There are hidden depths which superficial reading will not reveal. The Kolbrin is tendered for acceptance at its face value, or more importantly for its content of spiritual truths which in any religion are presented in a form peculiar to particular faiths. It is the degree of spiritual content expressed in any religion which establishes its status on the scale of human spirituality. The lifestyle of its adherents, their accepted precepts and practices, their moral standards, ethics, and social concern are what determines the worth of any spiritual philosophy. There have been and may still be associations of people who accept the Kolbrin as the pivot points of their lives. And it is noteworthy, from what is known, that their lifestyle and the quality of their lives were enhanced through doing so. People who conduct their lives according to the precepts of the Kolbrin in association with others of like mind will know just where they stand in relation to these others. Relationships established among people who are committed to such precepts, whatever their religious inclinations, are far more firmly founded than others which are based on philosophies established on patronizing doctrines, derived from cheap products obtained from the spiritual supermarket. One difficulty has been the fact that the guardians of the Kolbrin have never been literary folk, but simple craftsmen and people far removed from the scholastic and even commercial world. Although it formulates a distinctive spiritual philosophy, this book is not claimed to be anything other than a transmitter of ageless wisdom. It serves the common cause, the common good, and the common man through presentation in a particular form. The earlier preservation and subsequent compilation of the Kolbrin was the outcome of independent individual efforts. No one can claim authorship, and the present reconstructors who have compiled the book in its present form are no more than transmitters who accept in good faith what has been passed on to them. Sufficient funds have been received to ensure the production of the Kolbrin and its subsequent continuance. It is incumbent on the compilers to ensure the conservation of these funds and to take adequate steps to entrust them. Irrespective of origins or contributors, the Kolbrin as a whole and in its present form have been adequately validated and endorsed by higher authorities as being a body of wisdom conducive to spiritual enlightenment. It embodies essential spiritual truths irrespective of the manner of presentation. If there are a few extraneous items, they are not such as to affect the intrinsic value of the whole. Ethically, the Kolbrin holds its own with any other body of literature and is now offered to persons or groups seeking a philosophical focal point. This book enters the arena of life at a crucial stage in humanity's progress toward its destiny. At a time when the average family is becoming dysfunctional, when traditional values and standards, the concept of true love, and the development of spirituality are under siege. These are the days of decision, when mankind stands at the crossroad. Kolbrin will provide a worthy companion to those who choose to follow the more inspiring and viral road leading to ultimate enlightenment in the realms of truth and reality. May the God of your heart be with you along the way. Introduction. The Kolbrin, in its present production, incorporates a body of enlightened teachers, which are the treasure of the centuries, a light on the path of truth, and as applicable to the world today as they were in the past. There has, however, been a considerable amount of reconstruction, as the original writings survived only precariously. Most of what is presented here was actually salvaged from a pile of discarded manuscripts and was partially burned and damaged by the weather before being reconstructed into a manuscript from which this is rewritten. Undoubtedly, additional material has been incorporated with good intent to fill gaps and elaborate on the original. Something may have been lost in the modernization of various parts. The important point, however, is that this is not intended to be a historical record, an intellectual work or literary effort. It falls short of these and is rather a coherent and consistent body of spiritual teachings. It is on this aspect alone that it stands or falls. The spiritual truths presented here are all that matters. The rest can be regarded as an embellishment, a vehicle for presentation and conveyance. The message conveyed, whatever its form of presentation, is always the essential core, and ethically, Morally and spiritually, the Kolbrin concedes nothing to other works of a like nature. It should be seen as an inspirational work, the substance of which can be accepted with confidence and trust. While great care was exercised in the past to ensure that these transcriptions would be transmitted through the centuries in a form as unadulterated and unaltered as possible, little is known about the actual persons or body of people concerned. From what is known, the name Kolbrin was originally applied to a collection of manuscripts which were salvaged from Glastonbury Abbey at the time of its burning. The fire, which was arson, was intended to destroy the manuscripts, but they were secretly housed otherwise. In any event, it was believed that these heretical works were destroyed, and as it happened, the fire proved to be a good cover for their preservation. Some of the manuscripts were transcribed at some time onto thin metal plates, and collectively these were known as the Bronzebook of Britain. This designation was carried forward when they were written out in a book, Stitch, from in the 17th century. The subject matter was then divided into chapters and paragraphs were numbered. The whole was modernized in the latter part of the 19th or early part of the 20th century. Incorporated in the modern Kolbrin are manuscripts which were traditionally claimed to have been copied from salvaged manuscripts which were not transcribed onto metal plates and formed a work known as the Coelbook. During the second and third decades of this century, these books were in possession of a religious group in England which was never very powerful because requirements for membership were too restrictive. It would seem that throughout history, the Kolbrin has always been on the brink of extinction, yet it has survived, safeguarded by a few who barely knew what it was all about, who were neither intellectual nor wealthy, and for whom the practicalities of life took precedence. Originally, there were 21 books, which were said to be 12 books of Britain, 8 books of Egypt, and 1 of the Trojans. But of their name there is little certainty. Only a portion of these books remains, and it seems that much of historical nature has been trimmed away. It is known that at the beginning of the 14th century there was a settled community in Scotland under the leadership of one John Kailedy. The old Chaldeans, who were guardians of what they called the treasures of Britain, were never numerous and loosely organized, membership being maintained by itinerant smiths and other craftsmen. They seem to have previously been loosely named as coferals. The Kolbrin makes mention of wise strangers, and there is a tradition to the effect that these were the original Chaldeans. There are other explanations, but the writer is in no position to express any positive or worthwhile opinion. Does it really matter anyways? We are told that the Feral Master was Nathaniel Smith, martyred in the beginning of the 17th century. This appears to be the end of the old Chaldeans as an apparent body, but steps were taken to preserve the Kolbrin. For a long time it was buried or otherwise hidden, but sometime during the early part of the last century copies were written out in Biblical English, and 2 of the books were in existence just before the First World War. Since then, the various books of the Kolbrin have suffered many vicissitudes, and what remains is only part of the original. During the last World War, the old books were thrown out as worthless junk, saved and again discarded as heathen works of the devil, but luckily, again salvaged before irreparable damage was done. It has not been easy to reconstitute them, even with the assistance of more knowledgeable co-workers who filled in a few gaps with compatible references to modern works. No doubt, in its present form, the Kolbrin leaves much to be desired. The contents could perhaps have been condensed and much irrelevant matter deleted, but the compiler considered it his prime duty to preserve and retain every possible fragment and leave it to others better qualified to sift, revise, and condense. Obviously, some of the proper names are spelled wrong and some of the original correct ones may have been replaced by others, for it seems that in the past there was a biased selection of material to be included. No claim is made regarding historical accuracy, for the compiler is totally unqualified to voice any opinion in the respect. But as stated before, this is not a historical work, but the corpus of a doctrine and a way of life. Whose hands originally wrote its many parts is unimportant, and it is even less important to know who transcribed it later, though some details appear in the modern section. The phraseology may be cumbersome and even ungrammatical, because of the manner in which the biblical form of English has been modernized by one who has no scholarly pretenses whatsoever. It may be argued that this work should have been presented in its archaic form, to preserve authenticity, but the compiler disagrees, and we concur. The criterion by which any literary work should be judged is its message and intent, not its format. The words of themselves are sterile. It is the spirit of the whole that give the Kolbrin meaning and life. What is presented here is an attempt to pass on, as near as possible in its original form with all its defects and shortcomings in style and presentation, something which will be of benefit to all. The original writers attempted to make words convey something beyond inherent meaning. They endeavored to build an edifice of glory out of common clay. The importance of what is given here lies in what is projected out of the past into the present lamentable spiritual vacuum, in the help it can offer to the ordinary man and woman, not in what it offers to the literary world. On this basis alone, these writings must stand to be judged. The worth of any knowledge is in its value here and now, in present-day circumstances. We know from the later books of the Kolbrin that for centuries its contents had to be kept secret because they may have been misunderstood or found unacceptable. Perhaps they will fare better now. This book is resurrected with the sole intent of ranging it alongside the forces of good. Its publication will undoubtedly be difficult, for such a work can scarcely be deemed to have popular appeal. It deals with goodness and virtue, courage and mortality, with spiritual ideals and human aspirations, all unpopular and despised fare in these days of decision. It seeks to enshrine love in a place beyond clamor and craving of the mortal flesh, and this alone may be sufficient to call down derision upon it. The same effort as was put in the piecing together and reconstruction of the Kolbrin, put into a book pandering to the moral weaknesses of society and exploiting the jaded, degenerate appetites of modern life, would undoubtedly prove more popular. But can it be said, even in these morally unwholesome times, that the value of a publication depends solely on its popular appeal? In the Kolbrin, the masters can record only the outcome of their own searching. They found assurance, but cannot convey it directly to others. If others want it, they too must tread the path the masters trod. A long, weary road, not for the faint-hearted. The first step along that road is the study of the moral code and the standard of conduct required. The next step is to put these into practice, making them the rule of life. They are the disciplines which enabled the truly enlightened ones of the past to awaken inner perception and make direct contact with the universal source of truth. Only by following in their steps can anyone be assured of a path certain of reaching the desired goal. Originally, the Kolbrin was in two parts, the open book and the closed book, the latter being more properly called the Great Book of Eternity, the former the Great Book of Life. What is presented here is the open book. Actually, this book contains nothing not already known, for mankind has never been without guidance. Truth and wisdom can be no one's monopoly. Therefore, many things expressed therein are to be found elsewhere. Superficially, the Kolbrin may appear to be just a jumbled collection of maxims and old stories, some incomplete, but to judge it from this standpoint is like analyzing the pigments of the paint in a painting and counting and classifying the brush marks to discover what an artist wants to convey. To understand it fully, One must stand off and view it as a whole. Even the comprehension must flow from the heart and mind, not from the eyes. A society progresses through social evolution, not revolution. But the woes displayed by present-day society indicate that the evolutionary trend has taken a wrong direction. The standards of the past formulated to stabilize a society have been spurned, without any adequate substitute being put in their place. This is the tragedy of times. To get a more comprehensive view of where our society is heading, perhaps a better understanding of where we have been is needed. It is in this context that the Kolbrin is launched, to take its place in the greater scheme of things. The salutation or prologue to the Bronzebook, now incorporated in the Kolbrin. Greetings, unborn ones, now asleep in the dark womb of the future. Greetings from we who were once as you are now, and like whom you will one day be. We too hoped and feared, doubted and believed. Were you choosing a gift from the past to the future, what would it be? The golden treasures hoarded by kings, the bright jewels beloved by queens. Is worldly wealth still so important to you? If that would be your choice above all else, we are disappointed, for our labors have been in vain. Would you prefer the secret life of eternal youth? Have you altered so little from those who have lived and laughed today, with no thought turned towards the future? This thing which seems so desirable, were it yours, would you value it? Would it never pall? Would you still be grateful for it after 1,000 years have passed? The answer would be yes, if this life were all, the beginning and end, complete in itself. But might not this life be no more than a prelude, an introduction to something infinitely greater? Is the riddle still unsolved, the secret of the ages still well kept, known only by a few, even when these words are read? How many generations have passed without progress? Does mankind still lie passive like driftwood upon the sea of spiritual apathy, driven back and forth by changeable winds and conflicting currents, making no headway? Could we leave you the knowledge enabling you to live a life without turmoil, surrounded by every luxury and pleasure, a magic stone granting every desire, an all-healing potion, the ability to fly or know all things on earth? Would any of these satisfy the desires of your heart and fulfill your dreams? We who lie so far back along the road trust you have progressed beyond such petty aspirations. It is beyond our power to give such gifts, and were they ours to bestow, we would withhold them. For unless a gift confers a benefit, it were better not given. With the wisdom of your generation, tell us, which of the things mentioned would really benefit you, or even prove less bad than good? Or do you still remain unaware of your true nature and deeds? Who you are, how you speak and dress, we cannot know or imagine. This alone we know is truth. You are brother beings of ours and travel the road we once trod. We share one destiny and have the same true goal, though perhaps no more know in your day what these are than do in ours. Like to us, life comes to the unbidden. It is fraught with problems and difficulties. It alternates between light and shade, and like us, you wonder what awaits at the end. You too are victims of earth's delusions. You too find truth and perfection beyond your grasp, and you too aspire to beauty and goodness. These things we know about you. These things must be, or you would not exist. Your needs are no different from ours, but do you now know with certainty what they are? Your life serves the same purpose. You are part of the same pattern. You are ruled by the same impulses and urges. But do you know why and to what end? We know you are without certainty and assurance about what lies beyond the veil of death, for these cannot be given while man remains no more than man, and doubtless like us you remain suspended between doubt and belief. Our unborn friends, whatever your circumstances of life, you are the children of the past and heirs of those who have lived and died. We trust you have no cause to reproach those who once held stewardship over your estates. But whatever you think of the heritage, you cannot put it aside, any more than you can refuse the obligations of life. Maybe it brings you the happiness and security, the peace and plenty we never knew. If so, this will remain unread, for to you it would be a wilderness of words serving no purpose. If you have so much, if you have progressed so far, nothing we could give would be of benefit. To the traveler, information about the road behind is worthless. If this is your state, we hail you. We are proud of you, our worthy children of light, conceived in the long dark years wherein we labored and plowed our own short furrow. You have done well, and our greatest joy would be to stand beside you as you exultingly reach out for the crowning glory of godhood. But you may be no more enlightened than we, in which case accept our offering as a token of our regret, our desire to make amends on behalf of those who preceded you. For if you remain lost in spiritual darkness, the blame is theirs and not yours. This we give you, the hidden books containing the accumulated harvest of wisdom and truth garnered over the generations, the bread and oil which sustained us and never diminished. May they serve you in your day as well as they served us. Above all, may you be sufficiently enlightened to receive them. For today we are persecuted because of our books, and most who treasured and guarded them are now dead. We can only consign these books to the ground and destiny, trusting they will be called forth at the proper time and in receptive generation. These books, which we hand into the keeping of time, were written under the authority of revelation and inspiration. Containing truth, their message cannot be attacked by time, for truth is eternal. We make no claim to exact and accurate statements beyond the possibility of error and misinterpretation, for words are frail messengers. They are fallible things, unable to transmit accurately from mind to mind. Also, we cannot tell how they who resurrect the books will deal with the contents. They are written in letters known to the learned, but learning changes with the generations. These books are the glorious embodiment of eternal truth. But the words and expressions are unworthy garments, so that misconception and misunderstanding are not possible. Words are servants of the fallible mortal sphere, and when called upon to serve a realm of greater things, prove inadequate. Therefore, be not like some petty-minded ones of our generation who say, "The letters are misplaced and the words ill-used." They examine each blade of grass diligently, but fail to discover the purpose of the meadow. Such men lack insight, and seeing only the bare letters, say, "These tell me all. There is nothing more." We have a saying, "Do not judge a place of instruction by its bricks." Wisdom being eternal, doubtless, this will apply no less in your generation. So, unborn, unknowable ones, we humbly tender this, the gift of the past which we could not pass on otherwise. If you have advanced far along the road towards greatness, it will have no value. But if you still dally or have wandered away, lost in the elusive mists of worldliness, and none answers your cries, then take this hand extending out of the past. It will guide you faithfully and well. Down through the generations, men have persecuted, have suffered, and died so that truth and goodness might prevail. Remember them. If the world is good, then your peace and pleasures have been brought by their sacrifices. If it is not, then you must not quibble over the cost to yourselves in making it good. Surely no torments and terrors in your days could exceed those of the past. Farewell, unborn ones. With these few words we have reached from the day of the present into the night of the future. We have planted the seed. Will it grow or rot in the ground? What crop will it produce? We cannot know. Let fate deal with it as it will. We have gathered the seed, flailed and winnowed it and kept it with every care. We have planted well. We can do no more. May life deal better with you than with us. May you never be denied the comforting hand of hope. Farewell. The Book of Creation, extracted from the great book of the Sons of Fire. An account of the beginning of things and why they are as we find them. Chapter 1, Creation. 2, the birth of man. 3, the destruction and recreation. 4, the affliction of God. 5, in the beginning. 6, Daddam and Luid. 7, Herthu, son of the first father. And 8, Guinevere. Mortal knowledge is circumscribed by mortal ignorance, and mortal comprehension is circumscribed by spiritual reality. It is unwise for mortal man to attempt the understanding of that which is beyond his conception, for there lies the road to disbelief and madness. Yet man is man and ever fated to reach out beyond himself, striving to attain things which always just elude his grasp. So in his frustration he replaces the dimly seen incomprehensible with things within his understanding. If these things but poorly reflect reality, then is not the reflection of reality, distorted though it may be, of greater value than no reflection at all. There are no true beginnings on earth, for here all is effect, the ultimate cause being elsewhere. For who among men can say which came first, the seed or the plant? Yet in truth it is neither, for something neither seed nor plant preceded both, and that thing which always preceded by something else. Always there are ancestors back to the beginning, and back beyond to there is only God. This then is how things were told in the great book of the Sons of Fire. Before the beginning there was only one consciousness, that of the Eternal One whose nature cannot be expressed in words. It was the one soul spirit, the self-generator which cannot diminish. The unknown, unknowable one, brooding solitary in profound pregnant silence. The name which is uttered cannot be that of this great being, who remaining nameless is the beginning and the end, beyond time, beyond the reach of mortals, and we in our simplicity call it God. He who preceded all existed alone in his strange abode of uncreated light, which remains ever unextinguishable, and no understandable eye can ever behold it. The pulsating draughts of the eternal life light in his keeping. The pulsating draughts of the eternal life light in his keeping were not yet loosed. He knew himself alone. He was uncontrasted, unable to manifest in nothingness, for all within his being was unexpressed potential. The great cycles of eternity were yet to be spun out, to be thrown forth as the endless ages of existence in substance. They were to begin with God and return to him completed in infinite variety and expression. Earth was not yet in existence. There were no winds with the sky above them, high mountains were not raised, nor was the great river in its place. All was formless, without movement, calm, silent, void, and dark. No name had been named and no destinies foreshadowed. Eternal rest is intolerable, and unmanifested potential is frustration. Into the solitude of timelessness can divine loneliness. And from this arose the desire to create, that he might know and express himself, and this generated the love of God. He took thought and brought into being within himself the universal womb of creation containing the everlasting essence of slumbering spirit. The essence was quickened by a ripple from the mind of God, and a creative thought was projected. This generated power, which produced light, and this formed a substance like unto a mist of invisible dust. It divided the two forms of energy through being impregnated with the Spirit of God, and quickening the chaos of the void within the universal womb, became spun out into whirlpools of substance. From this activity, as sparks from a fire, came an infinite variety of spirit minds, each having creative powers within itself. The activating word was spoken, its echoes vibrate still, and there was a stirring movement which caused instability. A command was given, and this became the everlasting law. Henceforth, activity was controlled in harmonious rhythm, and the initial inertia was overcome. The law divided the materializing chaos from God and then established the boundaries of the eternal spheres. Time no longer slept on the bosom of God, for now there was change where before all had been unchanging, and change is time. Now within the universal womb was heat, substance, and life, and encompassing it was the word which is the law. The command was given, "Let the smallest of things form the greatest, and that which lives but a flash from everlastingness." Thus the universe came into being as a condensation of God's thought, and as it did so, it obscured him from all enclosed within his solidifying creation. Henceforth, God was hidden, for he has always remained dimly reflected in his creation. He became veiled from all that came forth from him. Creation does not explain itself. Under the law, it cannot do so. Its secrets have to be unraveled by the created. All things are by nature finite. They have a beginning, a middle, and an end. An unaccomplishable purpose would be eternal frustration, and therefore, the universe being created purposefully, it must have an objective. If it ended without anything else, then the God existing must slumber indifferent to its own activities. But he has made it a living work of greatness, operating under the changeless law. The creating word had been spoken. Now there was another command, and the power going forth smote the sun, so its face was lit, and it shone with a great radiance, pouring warmth and light upon its sister earth. Henceforth she would live within the protection of her brother's household, rejoicing in his benevolence and strength. The waters upon the bosom of earth were gathered together, and dry land appeared. When the covering of water was rolled back, the body of earth was unstable, damp, and yielding. The face of the sun shone down kindly upon his sister, and the dry land of her body became very hard. Humidity and dampness were taken away. He gave her a garment of fleece and a veil of fine linen, that she might clothe her body with modesty. From the great womb had sprung the spirit of life, and it was rampant in the heavens. It gazed upon earth and saw her fairness, and was filled with desire, and came out of the heavenly spaces to possess her. It came not peacefully as a lover, but tempestuously as a ravenger. Its breath howled along her corridors and raged among her mountaintops, but it did not discover the dwelling place of her spirit. She had withdrawn, as a woman withdraws before force, for modesty must not be outraged into submission. Yet she desired its embrace, for among all the radiant company she was honored. The sun saw her perplexity, and he wrestled with the spirit of life and overcame it. When it was subdued and the primal struggle had ceased, it was delivered by the sun to his sister. It was chastened and quietened, and in silence brooded over earth's waters, and she was stirred in response. Mud eggs of life potential were formed in swamps at the meeting places of land and two waters. The sun gave quickening heat, and life crawled forth upon the bosom of the earth. The land dust brought forth the male, and the dark water mist the female, and they united and multiplied. The first brought forth the second, and the two produced the third. Earth was no longer virgin, and the spirit of life grew old and departed. Earth was left garbed in the matron's mantle of green herbage covered the face of the land. The waters brought forth fishes and creatures which move about and twist themselves and wriggle in the waters. The serpents and the beasts of terrible aspect which were of yore, and reptiles which creep and crawl. There were tall walking things and dragons in hideous form clothed with terror, whose great bones may still be seen. Then came forth the womb of the earth all the beasts of the field and forest, all the creatures of creation having blood in their bodies, and it was complete. Beasts roamed the dry land, and fishes swam in the seas. There were birds in the skies, and worms within the soil. There were great land masses and high mountains, wide barren places and heaving waters. Fertile greenness covered the land, and abundant life swarmed in the seas, for now earth throbbed with the energy of life. Metals lay hidden in her rocks, and precious stones within the soil. Gold and silver were scattered and secreted. There was copper for tools and forests of timber. There were swamps of reeds and stone for every purpose. Everything was prepared. Everything was ready. And now earth awaited the coming of man. Chapter 2. The Birth of Man. The love of God penetrated the third veil and became the seed of souls within the soul sea. The body of man God made of water and things of the earth, breathing into him the spirit of life, that he might live. But man, when young, lived only to eat and drink and to fornicate, for being conscious only of the earth, he knew only earthly things and earthly ways. Now the Spirit of God moved over the face of the earth, but was not of the earth. It held all things and was in all things, but on earth could not be apart from anything. Without substance it was awake, but entering substance it slept. Consider that which was told by the servants of Eben, of heaven man, who once wandered the earth. He had no earthly substance and could not grasp its fruits, for he had no hands. He could not drink its waters, for he had no mouth. Nor could he feel the cool winds upon his skin. They tell how the ape tribe Salak, led by a heaven man, perished by flames before the valley of Lod. Only one she-ape reaching the cave heights above. When heaven man was reborn of the she-ape in the cavern of woe, could he taste the fruits of the earth, and drink of her waters, and feel the coolness of her winds? Did he not find good life? It is not all a tale of the courtyard. Man created from early substance alone could not know things not of earth, nor could spirit alone subdue him. Had man not been created, who would have known God's wisdom and power? As the spirit fills the body of man, so does God fill his creation. Therefore, it was that God saw something had to be which joined earth and spirit and was both. In his wisdom and by the creative impulses which governs the earth, he prepared a body for man. For the body of man is wholly of earth. Behold, the great day came when the Spirit, which is God, was joined with the beast, which is earth. Then earth writhed in labor of travail. Her mountains rocked back and forth, and her seas heaved up and down. Earth groaned in her lands and shrieked in her winds. She cried in the rivers and wept in her storms. So man was born of upheaval and strife. He came wretchedly and tumultuously, the offspring of a distraught earth. All was in discord. Snow fell in the hot wastelands, ice covered the fertile plains, the forest became seas. Where once it was hot, now it was cold, and where no rain had ever fallen, now there were floods. So man came forth, man the child of calamity, man the inheritor of creative struggle, man the battleground of extremes. Earth nurtured man with cautious affection, weaning him in the recesses of her body. Then when he was grown sufficiently to be lifted so he walked in the uprightness of God, she took him and raised him above all other creatures. She led him even into the presence of God, and she laid him on his great altar. A man imperfect, of earthly limitations, a thing unfinished, ungainly, and unlearned. But proudly was he presented to earth's creator. Not her firstborn was man, the son of earth, the grandchild of God, man the heir of tribulation and the pupil of affliction. God saw man, the offering of earth to her Lord, unconscious on the high altar, a sacrifice to him and a dedication to the spirits of fate. Then, from out of the unfathomable heights, and from behind the impenetrable veil, God came down above the altar, and he breathed into man the breath of eternal life. Into his sleeping body, God implanted a fragment of himself, the seed of a soul and the spark of divinity. A man, the mortal, became the man, the heir of God and the inheritor of immortality. Henceforth, he would have dominion over God's earthly estate. But he also had to unravel the circles of eternity, and his destiny was to be an everlasting seeking and striving. Man slept, but God opened the great eye within him, and man saw a vision of unsurpassed glory. He heard the voice of God saying, "O man, in your hand is now placed the tablet of your inheritance, and my seal is upon it. Know that all you desire within your heart may be yours, but first it is necessary that you be taught its value. Behold, the earth is filled with things of usefulness. They are prepared to your hand for a purpose. But the task is upon you to seek them out and learn their use. This is the tuition for the management of your inheritance. What you know to be good, seek for it, and it shall be found. You may plumb the seas and pluck the stars. You may live in everlasting glory and savor eternal delights. Above and below and all about there is nothing beyond your reach. All, with one exception, is yours to attain." Then God laid his hand upon man, saying, "Now you are even as I, except you sleep there enclosed in matter in the kingdom of illusion, while I dwell here in the freedom of reality and truth. It is not for me to come down to you, but for you to reach out to me." Man then saw a vision of glory encompassing even the spheres of splendor. Unbounded wisdom filled his heart, and he beheld beauty and perfection. The ultimates of truth and justice were unveiled before him. He became one with the profound peace of eternity and knew the joys of unceasing gladness. The eternal ages of time unrolled as a scroll before his eyes, and he saw written thereon all that was to become and occur. The great vaults of heaven were opened up unto him, and he saw everlasting fires and unconsumable powers that strove therein. He felt within himself the stirring of inexpressible love, and unlimited designs of grandeur filled his thoughts. His spirit ranged unhampered through all the spheres of existence. He was then even as God himself, and he knew the secret of the 7 spheres within the 3 spheres. Then God lifted his hand from man, and man was alone. The great vision departed, and he awoke. Only a dim and elusive recollection, no more than the shadow of a dream, remained. But deep within the sleeping soul there was a spark of remembrance, and it generated within man a restless longing for he knew not what. Henceforth, man was destined to wander discontented, seeking something he felt he knew but could not see, something which continually eluded him, perpetually goaded him, and forever tantalized him. Deep within himself, man knew something greater than himself was always with him and a part of him, spurring him on to greater deeds, greater thoughts, greater aspirations. It was something out beyond himself, scarcely realized and never found, something which told him that the radiance seen on the horizon but dimly reflected the hidden glory behind it. Man awoke, the revelation and vision gone. Only the grim reality of earth's untamed vastness surround him. But when he arose and stepped down unto the bosom of his mother earth, he was undaunted by the great powers that beset him, or by the magnitude of the task ahead. Within his heart he knew destiny lay beyond the squalor of his environment. He stepped out nobly, gladly accepting the challenge. He was now a new man. He was different.
He looked above and saw glory in the heavens. He saw beauty about him, and he knew goodness in things not of the earth. The vision of eternal values arose before his inner eye. His spirit was responding to its environment. Man was now man, truly man. The nature of man on earth was formed after the nature of things in heaven, and man had all things contained as potential within himself, except divine life. But he was as yet an untrained, undisciplined child, still nurtured simply upon the comforting bosom of earth. Man grew in stature, but earth was not indulgent, for she disciplined him firmly. She was ever strict and unyielding, chastening him often with blasts of displeasure. It was indeed the upbringing of one destined for greatness. He was made to suffer cold that he might learn to clothe himself, sent into the barren plains that his limbs should be strengthened, and into forests that his eye should be keen and his heart strong. He was perplexed with difficult problems and set the task of unraveling the illusions of nature. He was beset with hardships of every description. He was tested with frustrations and tempted with allurements. Never did earth relax the vigilance of her supervision. The child was raised sternly, for he needed the fortitude, courage, and cunning of a man to fit him for the task ahead. He grew wily and wiry in the hunt. He became adaptable, able to cope with any untoward happening. Overcoming the bewilderments of early days, he found explanations for the perplexities of his surroundings. Yet the struggle for knowledge, the need for adaptation, and the effort to survive were never relaxed. The earth child was well trained and disciplined. He was never unduly mollycoddled. He cried for bread and went hungry. He shivered and was cast out. He was sick and driven into the forest. Weary he was, lashed with storms. Thirsty he found the waters dried up. When weak, his burden was increased, and in the midst of rejoicing he was struck down with sorrow. In moments of weakness, he cried, "Enough, enough." But always something fortified and encouraged him. The earthling never fortified his godlikeness. For man was man, he was not cowed, nor his spirit broken. A wise God knew his limitations. As it is written in the wisdom of men, over-chastisement is as bad as no chastisement at all. But man was rarely chastised. He was tried, tested, and challenged. He was led, prodded, and urged, yet nothing was done unnecessarily. The seeming imperfections of earth, the hazards and inequalities of life, the cruelty, harshness, and apparent indifference to suffering and affliction are not what they seem. As it is, earth is perfect for its purpose. It is ignorance of that purpose which makes it appear imperfect. Where is there a wiser father than the Spirit of God, or a better mother than earth? What man is now, he owes to these. May he learn to be duly grateful. Above all, let him never forget the lessons learned in his upbringing. Chapter 3. The Destruction and Recreation. It is known, and the story comes down from ancient times, that there was not one creation but two, a creation and a recreation. It is a fact known to the wise that the earth was utterly destroyed once, then reborn a second wheel of creation. At the time of the great destruction of earth, God caused a dragon from out of the heavens to come and encompass her about. The dragon was frightful to behold. It lashed its tail, it breathed out fire and hot coals, and a great catastrophe was inflicted upon mankind. The body of the dragon was wreathed in a cold, bright light, and beneath, on the belly, was a ruddy-hued glow, while behind it trailed a flowing tail of smoke. It spewed out cinders and hot stones, and its breath was foul and stenchful, poisoning the nostrils of men. Its passage caused great thunderings and lightnings to rend the thick, darkened sky, all heaven and earth being made hot. The seas were loosened from their cradles and rose up, pouring across the land. There was an awful shrilling trumpeting which outpoured even the howling of the unleashed winds. Men stricken with terror went mad at the awful sight in the heavens. They were loosed from their senses and dashed about, crazed, not knowing what they did. The breath was sucked from their bodies, and they were burnt with a strange ash. Then it passed, leaving earth enwrapped within a dark and glowing mantle which was ruddily lit up inside. The bowels of the earth were torn open in great writhing upheavals, and a howling whirlwind rent the mountains apart. The wrath of the sky monster was loosed in the heavens. It lashed about in flaming fury, roaring like 1,000 thunders. It poured down fiery destruction amid a welter of thick black blood. So awesome was the fearfully aspected thing that the memory mercifully departed from man. His thoughts were smothered under a cloud of forgetfulness. The earth vomited forth great gusts of foul breath from awful mouths opening up in the midst of land. The evil breath bit at the throat before it drove men mad and killed them. Those who did not die in this manner were smothered under a cloud of red dust and ashes, or were swallowed by the yawning mouths of earths, or crushed beneath the crashing rocks. The first sky monster was joined by another which swallowed the tail of the one going before, but the two could not be seen at once. The sky monster reigned and raged above earth, doing battle to possess it. But the many-bladed sword of God cut them in pieces, and their falling bodies enlarged the land and the sea. In this manner the first earth was destroyed by calamity descending from out of the skies. The vaults of heaven had been opened to bring forth monsters more fearsome than any that ever haunted the uneasy dreams of men. Men and their dwelling places were gone. Only sky boulders and red earth remained where once they were. But amidst all the desolation, a few survived. For man is not easily destroyed. They crept out from caves and came down from the mountainsides. Their eyes were wild and their limbs trembled. Their bodies shook and their tongues lacked control. Their faces were twisted and the skin hung loose on their bones. They were as maddened as wild beasts driven into an enclosure before flames. They knew no law, being deprived of all the wisdom they once had, and those who had guided them were gone. The earth, only true altar of God, had offered up a sacrifice of life and sorrow to atone for the sins of mankind. Man had not sinned in deed, but in the things he had failed to do. Man suffers not only for what he does, but for what he fails to do. He was not chastised for making mistakes, but for failing to recognize and rectify them. Then the great canopy of dust and cloud which encompassed the earth, enshrouding it in heavy darkness, was pierced by a ruddy light, and the canopy swept down in great cloudbursts and raging storm waters. Cool moon tears were shed for the distress of earth and the woes of men. When the light of the sun pierced the earth's shroud, bathing the land in its revitalizing glory, the earth again knew night and day, for there were now signs of light and signs of darkness. The smothering canopy rolled away, and the vaults of heaven became visible to man. The foul air was purified, and new air clothed the reborn earth, shielding her from the dark, hostile void of heaven. The rainstorms ceased to beat upon the faces of the land, and the waters stilled their turmoil. Earthquakes no longer tore the earth open, nor was it burned and buried by hot rocks. The land masses were re-established in stability and solidity, standing firm in the midst of the surrounding waters. The ocean fell back to their assigned places, and the land stood steady upon its foundations. The sun shone upon land and sea, and life was renewed upon the face of the earth. Rain fell gently once more, and clouds of fleece floated across day skies. The waters were purified, the sediment sank, and life increased in abundance. Life was renewed, but it was different. Man survived, but he was not the same. The sun was not as it had been, and the moon had been taken away. man stood in the midst of renewal and regeneration. He looked up into the heavens, above in fear, for the awful powers of destruction lurking there. Henceforth, the placid skies would hold a terrifying secret. Man found the new earth firm and the heavens fixed. He rejoiced, but also feared, for he lived in dread that the heavens would again bring forth monsters and crash about him. When men came forth from their hiding places and refuges, the world their fathers had known was gone forever. The face of the land was changed, and earth was littered with rocks and stones which had fallen when he was dispelled. The face of the land was changed, and the earth was littered with rocks and stones which had fallen when the structure of heaven collapsed. One generation groped in the desolation and gloom, and as the thick darkness was dispelled, its children believed they were witnessing a new creation. Time passed, memory dimmed, and the record of evens was no longer clear. Generation followed generation, and as the ages unfolded, new tongues and new tales replaced the old. Chapter 4. The Affliction of God. This comes from the scroll of Carabal, Pactherman, who wrote, "The forebears of all the nations of man were once one people, and they were the elect of God who delivered all the earth over to them. All the people, the beasts of the field, the creatures of the wasteland, and the things that grow, they dwelt through long ages in lands of peace and plenty. There were some who struggled harder, were more disciplined, because their forefathers had crossed the great dark void. Their desires were turned Godward, and they were called the children of God. Their country was undulating and forested. It was fertile, having many rivers and marshes. There were great mountains to the east and to the west, and in the north was a vast stony plain. Then came the day when all things became still and apprehensive. For God caused a sign to appear in the heavens, so that men should know the earth would be afflicted. And the sign was a strange star. The star grew and waxed to a great brightness, and was awesome to behold. It put forth horns and sang, being unlike any other ever seen. So men, seeing it, said among themselves, 'Surely this is God appearing in the heavens above us.' The star was not God, though it was directed by his design, and the people had not wisdom to understand. Then God manifested himself in the heavens. His voice was as the roll of thunders, and he was clothed with smoke and fire. He carried lightnings in his hands, and his breath, falling upon the earth, brought forth brimstone and embers. His eye was a black void, and his mouth an abyss containing the winds of destruction. He encircled the whole of the heavens, bearing upon his whole back a black robe adorned with stars. Such was the likeness and manifestation of God in those days. Awesome was his countenance, terrible his voice of wrath. The sun and the moon hid themselves in fear, and there was a heavy darkness over the face of the earth. God passed through the spaces of the heavens above with a mighty roar and a loud trumpeting. Then came the grim dead silence and black red-lit twilight of doom. Great fires and smoke rose up from the ground, and men gasped for air. The land was rent asunder and swept clean by a mighty deluge of waters. A hole opened up in the middle of the land, the waters entered, and it sank beneath the seas. The mountains of the east and the west were split apart and stood up in the midst of the waters which raged about. The northland tilted and turned over on its side. Then again the tumult and clamor ceased, and all was silent. In the quiet stillness, madness broke out among men. Frenzy and shouting filled the air. They fell upon one another in senseless wanton bloodshed. Neither did they spare woman or child, for they knew not what they did. They ran unseeing, dashing themselves to destruction. They fled to caves and were buried, and taking refuge in trees, they were hung. There was rape, murder, and violence of every kind. The deluge of waters swept back, and the land was purged clean. Rain beat down unceasingly, and there was great winds. The surging waters overwhelmed the land and man. His flocks and his gardens and all his works ceased to exist. Some of the people were saved upon the mountainsides and upon the flotsam, but they were scattered far apart over the face of the earth. They fought for survival in the lands of uncouth people. Amid coldness they survived in caves and sheltered places. The land of the little people and the land of giants, the land of the necklace ones and the land of the marshes and mists, the lands of the east and west were all inundated. The mountain land and the lands of the south, where there is gold and great beasts, were not coveted by the waters. Men were distracted, and in despair they rejected the unseen God behind all things for something which they had seen and known by its manifestation. They were less than children in those days and could not know that God had afflicted the earth in understanding, and not willfully, for the sake of men and the correction of his ways. The earth is not for the pleasure of man, but is a place of instruction for his soul. A man more readily feels the stirrings of his spirit in the face of disaster than in the lap of luxury. The tuition of the soul is a long and arduous course of instruction and training. God is good, and from good evil cannot come. He is perfect, and perfection cannot produce imperfection. Only the limited understanding of man sees imperfection in that which is perfect for its purpose. The grievous afflictions of man was another of his great texts. He failed, and in so doing followed the path of unnatural gods of his making. Man makes gods by naming them, but where in this is the benefit to him? Evil comes in the midst of mankind, spawned by the fears and ignorance of men. An evil man becomes an evil spirit, and whatever evil there is on earth comes either from the evil of spirits or the evil of men. Chapter 5. In the beginning. Now, the children of God were molded by the hand of God, which is called Awen, and it manifested according to their desires. For all things which have life are molded by Awen. The fox, shivering in cold lands, longs for warmth, and so its cubs have warmer coats. The owl, clumsy in the dark, longs to see its prey more clearly, and in generations of longing the desire is granted. Awen makes everything what it is, for all things change under its law. Men too are molded by their desires, but unlike the beasts and birds, their yearnings are circumscribed by the laws of fate and destiny and the law of sowing and reaping. These, the desires modified by the laws, are called Nibiru. Unlike the beasts and birds, this, in man, is something relating to him rather than to his offspring, though they are not untouched by it. Destiny may be likened to a man who must travel to a distant city whether or not he wishes to make the journey, the destination being his destiny. He may choose whether to go by the way of a river or by way of the plain, whether across the mountains or through forests, on foot or horseback, slow or fast, and whatever befalls because of this decision is fate. If a tree falls on him because he chose the forest path, it was fated, for luck is an element of fate. Destiny leaves no choice. Fate gives limited choice, which may be good or bad, but it cannot be averted. What is fated must be, for at no point can there be any turning back. The circumstances and Nibiru of the traveler conforms to the law of sowing and reaping. He may travel in comfort or pain, happily or sorrowfully, with strength or weakness, heavily burdened or lightly burdened, well prepared or ill prepared. When the destination is set according to the degrees of a former life, then the circumstances of the journey should conform with the desire. For out the ground grew every kind of tree that was good for food, and every tree that was pleasant to the sight. Every herb that could be eaten, and every herb that flowered was there. The tree of life, which was called glacier, having leaves of gold and copper, was within the sacred enclosure. There too was the great tree of wisdom, bearing the fruits of knowledge, granting the choice and the ability to know the true from the false. It is the same tree which can be read as men read a book. There also was the tree of trespass, beneath which grew the lotus of rapture. And in the center was the place of power, where God made his presence known. Time passed, and the children of God were grown strong and upright under the temperature hammer of God. And earth, the anvil of God, became more kindly. All was pleasant and food plentiful, but life paused in such places. For it is against the nature of man to flourish in these circumstances. Earth is not for pleasurable dallying. It is a place of teaching, trial, and testing. The children of God were not yet the heirs of God, nor inheritors of godhood, and having paid the debts of sowing and reaping was one triumphant over an individual. He was Fanvar, son of Auma and Atem. He was wise and knew all things. He beheld mysteries and secret things hidden from the eyes of other men. He saw sunrise and the sun setting in their splendor, but longed for things not realizable in the place where he lived. So because he walked with God, he was culled out from his kind and brought to Meruah, the garden place. He came to it across the mountains and wastelands, arriving after many days' journeying, wearying and close to death because of the provisions he suffered. He could just reach the refreshing waters, from which he drank deeply, and filled with exhaustion he slept. In his sleep he dreamed, and this was the manner of his dreaming. He saw before him a being of indescribably glory and majesty, who said, "I am the God above all, even above the God of your people. I am that which fulfills the aspirations of men, and I am that which they are fulfilled. You, having traversed all the circles of Envenidu and established your worthiness, are now made my governor on earth, and you shall rule all things here, guiding them in my ways, leading them ever upward into the glory. This will be your labor, and behold, here is your reward." A cloud mist seemed to gather about the glorious being, enfolding him so he was no longer visible. Then the mist gradually cleared, and the man saw another form emerging. It was that of a woman, but one such as Fanvar had never seen before, beautiful beyond his conception of beauty, with such perfection of form and grace that he was dumbfounded. Yet the vision was not substantial. She was a wraith, an ethereal being. The man awoke and sought food from the fruits about him, and having refreshed himself, wandered about the garden. Wherever he went, he saw the wraith, but was unafraid because she smiled encouraging, bringing comfort to his heart. He built himself a shelter and grew strong again, but always, wherever he went, the wraith was not far distant. One day, near the edge of the garden, he fell asleep in the heat of the day and awoke to find himself surrounded by the sons of Bothas. Not true men, but yoslings, kinsfolk to the beasts of the forest. Before they could take his strength and wisdom, he loosed himself among them, slaying some in his rage and might before the rest ran away. When it was done, he sat himself down beneath a great tree, for he was wounded, and blood gushed out from his side and gathered thickly beside him. He became faint, falling into a deep sleep, and while he slept, a wondrous thing happened. The wraith came and lay beside him, taking blood from his wound upon herself, so it congealed about her. Thus the spirit being became clothed with flesh, born of congealing blood, and being sundered from his side, she rose a mortal woman. In his heart Fanvar was not at rest because of her likeness, but she was gentle, ministering to him with solitude, and being skillful in the ways of healing, she made him whole. Therefore, when he had grown strong again, he made her queen of the gardenland. And she was so called even by our fathers, who named her Gullah. But Fanvar called her Arua, meaning help. In our tongue she is called the Lady of Lainvid. Now God enlightened Fanvar concerning the woman, saying, "This woman was drawn from her compatible abode in a realm of beauty through the yearning aspirations of men. Her coming accomplishes something which would otherwise have taken countless generations. For earth is more fitting for men to learn manly things than for women to learn womanly ones. This woman is not as other women, being in no way like yourself. Every hair of her head is unlike that of a man. Every drop of blood and every particle of flesh is that of a woman and quite unlike that of a man. Her thoughts and desires are different. She is neither coarse nor uncouth, being altogether of another, more refined realm. Her daughters will walk proudly, endowed with every womanly perfection and grace. Delicacy, modesty, and charm will be the lovely jewels enhancing their womanliness. Henceforth, man will be truly man, and woman will be truly woman, man being girded with manliness, and woman being clothed with womanliness. Yet they shall walk together hand in hand toward the ascending glory before them, each the helpmate and inspiration of the other. So Fanvar and Arua lived in contentment amid bounty and fruitfulness, with freedom from afflictions and sickness. They delighted in each other, and because of their differences were drawn closer together. Arua brought one thing with her when she crossed the misty frontier, the treasure of Lanvid, the jewel contained in the moon chalice, the stone of inspiration fashioned by the desires of men, never owned by any but the daughters of Arua. This, the Langil, Arua gave to Fanvar as her dowry and her pledge of purity and exclusiveness. She followed the ways of the cradle land, not the ways of earth. Within the garden land was the sacred enclosure, the domain of Fanvar and Arua, forbidden to those of the children of God who had now come to this place. It contained the chalice of fulfillment, granting any who drank from it the realization of all things which they aspired. None might drink from this save Fanvar and Arua. Also there was the cauldron of immortality, containing an essence distilled from the fruits growing in the garden, and this guarded against mortal ills. Arua brought forth a son by Fanvar, and he was called Ratoki, and a daughter who was called Armina. Each knew the mysteries of magic and the ways of the stars. In the fullness of time, Ratuki married among the daughters of the sons of God and had 2 sons, Enanari and Nenduka. It was Enanari who first taught the weaving of cloth from plants, and Nenduka who was a mighty hunter. Armina also married among the sons of God and brought forth a son who was called Belenki, and daughters called Ananua and Mameta. Ananua knew the making of pots and things of clay, and Mameta the taming of beasts and birds. Nenduka had 2 sons, Namtara and Canaan. Namtara had 2 sons also, Nenduka and Daddam, before dying in the fullness of manhood. Belenki married Enidva and had a son called Enkidua and a daughter called Estartha, meaning maid of the morning. And she became a great teacher among the children of God. This was the Estartha who became the first moon maiden, being later called Lady of the Morning Star. Enkidua had a daughter, and her name was Meva. Outside the sacred enclosure known as Jasar, but forming a gateway into it, was a circular structure of stones called Gilgal, and within this was a sacred shrine wherein was kept a sacred vessel called Guinevere. This was like a goblet and was made of a rainbow-hued crystal set in gold with pearls. Above the cup appearing a shimmering moon-colored mist like a thin, cold flame. At certain times when the heavens were in proper position, the Guinevere was filled with moon dew and potions from the cauldron within the sacred enclosure, making a pale, honey-colored liquor, and this the people drank from the goblet. However, there were different proportions in the vessel for those of the blood of Fanvar and Arua, and those who were children of God, but not of their blood. It was the potion from Guinevere which kept sickness and disease away from those who drank it. Daddam, the first father, married Latha, and they had a son called Herthu. Daddam then married Meva, who had a daughter, not by him, and this was Guinevere, the cuckold's child, fathered by Abramened of Gwarthan, son of Namtenagal, whom we call Luid the Dark Father. About the land of the children of God was the wasteland where Yoslings, called the children of Zumat, which means they who inherit death, dwelt. Among these, Namtenagal, the wily hunter, was the most wise and cunning. He alone was afraid of the children of God and alone dared enter the garden land. In the days when Astartha was teaching, Namtanegel often came to hear her words, and the children of God were not displeased. For teaching the wild men about them was a duty which they had been charged. Namtanegel therefore participated in their rites, but could not partake of the elixir from the Guinevere, because this was forbidden. While it gave health and strength to the children of God, safeguarding them from the sickness of the yoslings, if given to others it caused a wasting away. It was also altogether forbidden for any of the children of God to mate with the yoslings, for this was deemed to be the most unforgivable sins. Now the willy one learned much from Astartha, and in the fullness of time brought his own son to her, and he became as her son, living in her house and forsaking the ways of his people. Astartha called him Luid the Lightbringer, for it was her intention that he should be taught the ways of those who walked in light, that he might in time enlighten his own people. Luid grew up tall and handsome. He was quick to learn, and he became wise. He was also a man of the chase, strong and enduring, a hunter of renown. But there were times when the call of his people was strong. Then he would go furtively into the night to indulge in their dark rituals. Thus he became knowledgeable in the ways of the flesh and in the carnal indulgences of the body. Daddam became a servant of the sacred enclosure where the misty veil between the realms could be penetrated. For all those having the blood of Arua had twine sight, an ability to see wraiths and sith folk, ansees and spirit beings, all the things of the other world, not clearly, but as through a veil. Beside the place called Jazar was a pleasant parkland with trees of every kind and a stream, also thickets of flowering bushes and all manner of plants growing lushly. It was the custom of Maeva to wander there in the sunshine, and Luid also went there. So it came about that they met among the trees. Now she saw he was handsome, possessed of many attractions, so her foot was stayed and she did not run away. As the days passed, they dallied longer together, and Luid talked of things Maeva had not heard before. She felt a stirring in her blood, but did not respond or heed his temptations because of the things which were forbidden. So Luid went to the Moon Mother, wise woman of the Yoslings, and telling of his desires, beseeched her to help him. The Moon Mother gave him 2 apples containing a vile substance which they had drawn through their stalks. This Luid gave to Maeva, who then became helpless in his hands. They met again after this, for Maeva became enamored towards Luid. But it happened that she became ill with a strange sickness and was afraid. Then Daddam became ill, and Luid also, and Luid said to the woman, "You must obtain the pure essences from within the sacred enclosure, and Satina, the Moon Mother, will prepare an elixir which will cure us." This he said because none of his kind had ever been able to obtain the sacred substances, though they had always coveted what had been denied them. Now, because of her frailty, the woman was pliable in his hands, and Luid seized the opportunity. To achieve his ends, Luid gave Maeva a potion which had been prepared by the Moon Mother, and she administered this to Daddam and those with him by guile and deceit, so that they fell asleep. While they slept, Maeva stole the sacred substances and took them to Luid, who gave them to the Moon Mother, and she made a brew. Part of this was given to Maeva, and the rest was drunk by the Yoslings from their awful Anketal during their night rites. When the morning came, they were all smitten with grievous pains, and before the sun set that day all the Yoslings were stricken with a sickness such as they had never seen before. Maeva took what had been given to her, and finding Daddam laid low in his bed, gave him a draught from her vessel, though she had to use womanly wiles to get him to drink it. She drank the remainder, and they both slept. But when they awoke in the morning, both were suffering pains, and this was something they had not known before. Daddam said to the woman, "What have you done? For what has happened to us cannot be unless the things which are forbidden have been done." The woman replied, "Lord, I was tempted and I fell. I have done that which is forbidden and unforgivable. Daddam said, I am bound by duty to do certain things, but first let us go into the Jasar, to the place. Daddam said, I am bound by duty to do certain things, but first let us go into the Jasar, to the place called Beth Kalaris, where I will seek enlightenment. So they went there together and stood before the shrine beneath the tree of wisdom. There they were filled with an inflowing vision, seeing themselves as they were and as they should have been, and they were ashamed. He because he had not followed the proper path of a man, and she because of her falsity. There in the reflecting mist, the contamination of the woman was revealed, and the man's heart shriveled within him like a flower licked by flame. Then they saw the great spirit being materializing in the reflecting mist, and he said to them, Woe to you and your house, for the greatest of evils has befallen the race of the children of God, and it is defiled. The heritage of Kadam Hapa is lost. The fetid flow defiling the woman results from the incompatible intermingling. But it is not all, for sicknesses and diseases are also generating from the ferments of the impure implantation. Daddam said, The fault is with the woman. Wherefore should I suffer? The spirit being replied, Because you two are now as one of the cankerworms of disease and sickness strike both equally. But you shall not again defile this place. Henceforth the misty veil becomes an impenetrable barrier severing our two realms from each other, so they can no longer be easily spanned. Between us there will now be no means of communication. Man and woman fated to unite in love divine shall be divided and set apart, though ever yearning reunion. They may cleave one to the other, seeking the unity which will rekindle the flame, but unless their efforts transcend the limitations of earthly things, they will be in vain. The spirit of man is now severed from the whole and cast again into unconsciousness, and it too shall long for reunion with the whole. The spark shall seek to return to the fire, for otherwise it becomes nothing. The web of fate is rewoven, and the paths of destiny remade. The design of life is redrawn. Again, the progression begins in ignorance, birth and death, pain and pleasure, joy and sorrow, success, failure, love, hate, peace, and war, all the light and all the shade, the many hues making the splendidly intricate pattern of life on earth. This is a new beginning, but a beginning not in purity and unencumbered, but one already weighted with debts and burdens. The spirit being continued, Enough wickedness has been wrought by your willfulness and disobedience, for the decrees forbidding certain things were for your own benefit. Immortality was nearly within your reach. But had you achieved this, you would have brought an even more grievous evil upon yourselves and your inheritors. For freed from servitude to change, you and they would have been unable to progress. The children of God were driven out of the garden land by spirit beings, and then guardians were set at its gates so no one could re-enter. Then it was withdrawn beyond the misty veil, the waters ceased to flow, and the fertility departed. Only a wilderness remained. The children of God went to dwell in the land of Amanigal, which is beyond the mountains of Mashur by the sea of Dalamuna. From this time onward, man fashioned his own spirit-likeness. Some who were loathsome in aspect, even unto themselves, went apart and were mercifully veiled in dark depths. They said to themselves, Let us dwell here in the darkness, and prepare a place for others like ourselves, so that when they follow, they abide here and join us. Thus were the dark regions formed and inhabited by demons, who are naught but the hideously fashioned spirits of evil men. These things have been written into the record. In Sibuat, they used to say this was the manner of man's making. God sent his creating craftsman spirit down to earth, and the reflection of the one was drawn into a spiritless body, and this became the heart of man. These are the words written by Thonis of Myra and Laodicea in his day. You ask me, what is man, and I answer. He is life becoming aware of itself. He is the intangible knowing the tangible, spirit in matter, fire in water. When this first happened, none remembers, and only the old folk tales remain. There was the beginning and then the garden, and it was in this garden man found himself. Before this he was not free, being one with everything about him. As he could not disobey, good and evil could not be, they were non-existent. Man became free through awareness of himself, and with this knowledge denied any kinship with the beast, as he was no longer in harmonious relations with things of the earth. He became discontented, dissatisfied, and restless. He wanted to belong, but felt his place of belonging was not here. He had been reborn as a man-god, and therefore it is truly said that man was born of earth and spirit. Under a tree, the symbol of life, and in a garden. There the eyes of man and woman were open, and being above the beasts, they knew they were different and set apart from all else that breathed. They separated themselves, being now ashamed of their state and strangers to each other. The carnal satisfaction of lesser creatures now no longer sufficed. They had lost contact with the source of light, but though knowing something was lacking, knew what not. They had fallen into carnal knowledge which only man can know, for only he feels the reproach of divinity. They were removed from the garden of content by an inhalation of the divine substance, and could not be turned because of the barrier between man and non-man. Kailedy has written, The entwined were cut apart, and since that day have never known content. They wander restlessly, ever seeking to unite again, and together find the jewel which is lost to earth forever. Lupisis has written, This first woman who came from the void is the eternally glorified goddess, the inspirer of hearts, the ideal of womanhood honored by all men, the priestess at the shrines of delicacy and tenderness. She was the ideal woman who, because of man's nature, is always tempted by his twin shade, the beast in his form. If the beast triumphs and she falls, the ideal becomes enshrouded in winding cloths of disillusionment, and something is lost to the heart of a man. These words are also there. They did not partake of wisdom, and fruit from the tree of knowledge is bitter. Men are denied their true birthright. The fall of man was a fall from loving contact with God into material carnality. The soul that had shared the consciousness of God fell into unconsciousness by becoming ensnared in matter. The fall severed man from the source of his spiritual sustenance. Thereafter his efforts were to struggle back, and his blind groping for God, after the fall he discovered demons, and found it easier to worship them than to continue the search. God is always waiting. Man has only to look up. But it is easier to go downhill than to climb it. It is easier for man's spiritual beliefs to degenerate than to evolve. Who among men knows the truth and can write the certain knowledge? Would not this certainty be against the law? No man was there at the beginning to see and write. But of one thing alone we can be sure. The creating God knows how and why. And could the acts of one so great be without purpose? Chapter 6. Daddam and Luid. Maeva fled for her life, and many kingfolk went with her. But Daddam was unable to follow, being laid low with the sickness. This loosened his tongue so it became uncontrollable, making him babble like a child, and the sickness covered his body with red sores from with which came an issue. Luid also departed for a place far out in the wilderness. Those with Daddam, who looked back towards the place of the garden, saw bright tongues of light licking the sky above it, the whole being interwoven with flickering flames in many hues. Those who sought to return were repulsed with a tingling ache over their bodies, which increased into severe pain as they approached, so they were driven away. When Daddam recovered so he could stand, only a few remained with him, and they all moved further into the wilderness to a place where there was water and pasture. There Daddam left Herthu, his son, and the boy's mother, with Habaris the learned, and set out to find Luid. After many days, Daddam and those with him came upon Luid, and his yoslings were full of sickness, and slew many. But Luid was not slain, though mortally wounded, and he lay against a great rock. When Daddam came near, Luid raised an arm heavily and said, "Hail to the victor and benefactor, who was come to terminate our wretchedness." While Daddam stood sternly contemplating him, Luid said, "To kill me now is your prerogative, for even we lesser beings who are far removed from the godmen have the law of husbandly pride. What I did has not been done before, and it will be done again, but I erred by crossing an unknown barrier, which could not be discerned. For we within ourselves are no more contagious to each other than are your people. Then I must die. If then I must die, let it be for my part in spawning the cankerworms of disease which have stricken both our peoples. Back in the dreaming time when the great gods strove among themselves for dominion of the sky spaces, and the wide expanse of earth was rent apart by unearthly wildfire, Bemotho was cut apart by the bright arrows of Shemas. Then this land was given to my people as their dominion, while yours was in another unearthly place far distant. Our domains was a pleasant place, and though you teach that because of this we remained as we are, yet we were content. We know of no great design, nor of any barely attainable objectives to which men must aspire. Such strivings, as you know, is to us no more purposeless vexation. I have my God, and you have yours. And as they strove against the other before times, so will it always be. But now there is a new battleground with new battle chiefs. I will go to my appointed place, and you will go to yours, and from thence, as leaders of the fray, we shall wage a never-ceasing war. Such is fated and must be. But who will win the fair prize of earth for their king? We shall not strive with clubs and lances, the hurling stone and flying darts, but with more subtle weaponry. This thing is not our choice. We are but playings of fate. That you and I should lead the fray is not because of our qualities, but because we were where we were, when we were. Now we are but two precarious points of life in a hostile wilderness. But what might be in 100 generations? Daddam said, "These things I know too, for my eyes have always been opened. I too have looked out into an endless plain without any horizon. But I shall lead those who have grown strong through seeking and striving, while those in your ranks will be weakened through indulgence in the flesh pots and pleasure places of earth. We are the disinherited, but not the disowned. We have the seeds of victory within us. You and yours were never more than you are, sons of the easy path, followers of the downhill road." Then, when these things had been spoken, Luid died, and Daddam and those with him burnt his body. Daddam and those with him wandered the wasteland for many days, then turned southward toward the mountain. Then it happened that one day Daddam was seated apart, in solitude among the rocks, with chin on chest, and a hunter of the Eubalites came upon him from behind. The hunter slung a smooth stone as a man turned, and it struck out his eye. Then the Eubalite slew him by smashing in his head with a stone. The hunter was the son of Ankadur, son of Enanari, king of the Eubalites, by Urkala, daughter of the Chasites, This is known because those who were with Daddam came out to the barren places and learned the ways of builders, becoming great among the Eubalites and raising cities along the rivers. Among them was Enkigal, who built Carador, which stands between the two great rivers, and Balat Sharaman, who taught men the ways of writing, setting the letters upon a pillar in Herak. Chapter 7. Herthu, son of the first father. The Book of Beginnings tells us all things began with Var Kelfa, therein called Awent Khalifa, from whom flows Gwynn, the energizer which stabilizes all things so they maintain their proper form, and Awen, which responds to the molding desires. This is well enough, but men concern themselves more with the beginnings of their race, and ours is rooted in Herthu, the sun-faced son of the first father. While Herthu was still young, he was expelled from the lush lands where he was born, and he journeyed across the harsh lands in the company and keeping of wise Habaris. After many days they came to the Caucasus, cradle land of our race, land of mountains and rivers, which is beside Ardis, and they encamped there in a valley. With them were retainers and flocks. Herthu grew to manhood there, and always Habaris was at his side, instructing him in all the things he should know. He taught Herthu the 9 essential disciplines of Emain, and the secrets of the 3 sacred vessels. Herthu learned that there was a place of gloom, where the air was foul, and malodorous breezes carried pestilence and poisonous particles. This was the source of all maladies and ailments and all of the things which cause putrefaction and decay. This place had been closed off from earth, for it existed in another realm beyond the ken of mortals. But it had been brought into attunement with earth when a forbidden act was accomplished. Thus the bodies of mortals became susceptible to influences from the baleful place. To this and similar parts of the other world the wicked would be drawn when they passed through the grim gates of death, but Habaris taught a different conception of wickedness, one where lack of effort, indolence, and indifference to duty and obligations, the taking of the easy path, were just as wrong as actual deeds of wickedness. He taught that men reach the true goal of life by transmuting lust-love into true love, that true victory is gained only over the defeated bodies of their vanquished passions and baser selves. These and many other things were taught by Habaris, but many of his teachings displeased the people of Caucasus, who were then, as they were before Herthu's forefather was led away. So Habaris concealed many things from them and taught by simple tales things within their understanding. He taught them the mysteries concerning the wheel of the years, and divided the year into a summer half and a winter half, with a great year circle of 52 years, 104 of which was the circle of the destroyer. He gave them the laws of the wheel and woe, and established the folk feasts of harvest tide and seeing tide. He taught them the ritual of Ulyssodui. But Habaris instructed Herthu in the ways of the other world. He taught him concerning the 3 rays from the central invisible sun, which manifest all things, upholding them in stability of form. Also concerning the oversoul which filled everything in creation, as the soul self filled the mortal body. This soul self, he declared, suppression of the baser instincts within mortals. It was strengthened by development of feelings of love between man and woman, and between these and their kindred, by the appreciation of beauty and devotion to duty, by the development of all qualities that pertain to humans and not to animals. Herthu learned that the soul self is quickened by soul substances outflowing from the Godhead, that the strong soul is transformed and molded to the soul's desire, but the weak soul is not its own master. It is flabby, unstable, and is pulled into a state of distortion by its own vices. In the afterlife there is unbounded joy for the entry of a noble soul. It will glow with splendor and stand out proudly. The mean soul of the wicked is dull-hued, twisted, and drab, and being drawn towards its own compatible state, it shrinks into the dark places. When Herthu had barely crossed the threshold of manhood, black-bearded spearmen began to ravish the borders of Caucasus. And Idalvar, king of that country, called his fighting men together, and when word came to Herthu, he prepared to depart. But Habris bid him stay a while, for he was unprepared for battle. Then Habris prepared a strange fire with stones, unlike any fire seen before, and when it burnt low, he plucked out that which is called child of the green flame, and he beat it out so it became a blade. This he fitted to a horned hand grip, and when it was edged and blooded, gave it to Herthu, saying, "Behold, 'tis Lena the bitter biter, faithful servant of he who strikes hard and true." Then he made a shield of wicker covered with ox hide and a cap of hide, which came down over the face and neck. So equipped, Herthu went to the encampment of Idalvar, taking 8 fighting men with him. In those days men fought with hand-thrown spears and clubs, with flung stones and sticks sharpened by fire and weighted, but they did not close in the battle clash. So when Idalvar saw the battle blade of Herthu, he wondered, and it passed his understanding. But when he saw Herthu close on the battlefield and foemen fall before him, he was amazed. No man about the king could understand the making of such weapons, offspring of fire and stone. But Habris made others, and Herthu became the king's right-hand man and the first hero of the noble race. The king offered Herthu his daughter's hand in marriage, but Herthu declined, saying, "The days of my manhood are not yet fulfilled." When the war-filled days had passed, Herthu withdrew to the place where Habris made the bright battle blade, and already he had taught the mysteries of their making to others, sealing their mouths with magic. But Herthu was less concerned with the weaponry of war than the mysteries of life and the battles of the spirits beset by the battle brothers, and these were the things they learned from his mouth. Beyond God there is an absolute which no man should try to understand, for it exists and has always existed in a state beyond man's finite comprehension. It is from this absolute that God, the ultimate in all perfections, was engendered. To create, God first visualized in thought. Then he produced an outflowing wave of power, which, in a manner of speaking, solidified what might be called building stones. The outflowing power also produced the celestial hymn, which brought the building stones together in harmonious forms. So it is truly said that all creation is the harp of God, and it responds to his song and manipulations. It is an everlasting unfoldment. The voice of God can also be heard in the voice of his beautiful daughter, who endows all growing things with life and beauty. There is a divine purpose in creation, which may be known only to the few. This knowledge is the key to all unanswered questions. Acquiring it is like the drawing back of heavy curtains which have kept a room in gloomy half-light. So all things suddenly became clear and distinct. He who gains this knowledge knows the grand secret, the answer to the riddle of the ages, and knows beyond a shadow of a doubt this divine purpose and the divine secret concerning it. It is called Guenkelva. Apart from Guenkelva, God gains nothing from his creation except that as a being possessing infinite love and goodness, he must have something to receive the gift of love and respond to it. Even among mortal beings, who was there that could find satisfactory fulfillment in self-love? Also, he needed something wherewith he could contract himself, some medium wherein he could perform, and this is creation. Creation is also for mortals the school of life, the training ground for godhood. There are 3 circles of reality, 3 realms, 3 stages of existence. They are heaven, where perfection visualized on earth may be realized and desires and ideals materialized, where hard-striven for aspirations are attained. It is the place where all the properly developed spiritual potential latent in man reaches maturity and fulfillment. Earth, the place of training, development, and preparation, the testing ground. The battlefield where men discover their true natures when confronted by life's challenges, contests, and contentions, where competition and controversy are the rule. It is here that aims and objectives are conceived and thought out for realization later in the proper place. It is a starting point, the beginning of the journey. It is here that the proper road must be wisely chosen. Then there is the realm of the misty horizon, the intermediate place, the place of spirits, where those above can commune with those below and where free spirits wander within their limitations. These things which Habaras taught in those far-off days have been rewritten in transmission to accord with our understanding, but it is unwise to voice them in these troublesome days, when words become snares to entrap the unwary. Now Edelvar desired to learn the secret of the bright blade engendering thunderstones, but no man who came with Habaras or labored for him would disclose any part of it, and the king was afraid to put them to the test. So, having thought the matter out, the king sent for his daughters and told them what he expected them to do, for he had devised a plan to learn the secret. Then he sent an invitation to Herthu and Habaras. When they arrived at the king's encampment, they found a great gathering in their honor, and the king's daughters favorably inclined towards them, one smiling upon the Herthu and the other upon Habaras, who was at the age of hoary-headedness. Though at first Habaras was indifferent and wearied her, the king's daughters pandered to him, encouraging even his follies, setting out to charm him with her wit and beauty. It was no great length of time before her womanly wiles ensnared the heart of Habaras, and thought he was almost ripe for the surrender of secrets. The damsel's efforts had taxed her, and the game became tiresome. So there came an evening when she could not endure his company. In the midst of the merrymaking, when the ale bowls had made many rounds and the sound of song and story was at its height, she slipped away with a young battleman who attended upon her father. Many who sat among the benches saw this and whispered to one another, nodding knowingly in the direction of Habaras, who was not unaware, though he appeared to have drunk to his capacity. Habaras had learned to love the young woman, so he was sorely heart-smitten. But within himself he knew the tree of winter love bears only winter's fruits. Yet he made no excuses to himself for her, thinking perhaps it was just some girlishness with no more weight than a floating feather. Nothing of serious import, for it was true the merrymaking was better suited to the natures of men than the natures of women. Maybe, he thought, it is just an innocent indiscretion. So when the day came to its fullness and those who had made merry went heavily about their tasks, Habaras approached the king and asked for his daughter's hand in marriage. He said, "Your daughter, Clara, has delighted me with her winsome ways. She has charmed me with her gaiety and beauty. She has displayed much pleasure in my company. Surely I have not misread the signs." The king was not overpleased, for though he greatly desired to know the secret of the bright blade, he had not intended giving his daughter's hand to Habaras, but neither did he wish to offend him. Therefore he was wary in reply, saying, "It is the custom for any suitor for a high-born woman's hand to be himself high-born and worthily battle-blooded. Yet such is my affection for you that I would not let even the custom become a bar to this marriage. And you may be a battle-blooded man among your own people. But let us not enter lightly into this thing, for the girl is still young and wouldn't be well if you established yourself favorably with her. She will be a worthy wife indeed, for she is one who is ever ready to learn, one with an inquiring mind. Nothing gives her greater pleasure than the acquisition of knowledge. So the matter was left. Now, some days later, the Edelval and his retinue, accompanied by Herthu and Habaris, went to the gathering place for folk feasts, some 5 days' journey away. People were accustomed to meeting here every 13 moons to celebrate the season of fruitfulness, many coming a great distance. Beside the gathering place was the compound of a fair-framed seer and warlock called Guidon, who in the fullness of the moon on the third night would prophesy events for the forthcoming year. Edelvar and those with him presented their gifts and took their places before the compound. Presently, Guidon came out cloaked in the skins of wild dogs with a horned crown and a skull-headed staff. He seated himself before a small fire into which he threw prescriptions, making a cloud of smoke which completely enveloped him. When this had drifted away, he seemed to be asleep, but after a while he lifted his head. Then, raising himself up, he started to prophesy. He talked a while of small matters, then told of dangers to the people through enemies who would bear down from the Northlands. He prophesied a great bloodletting, telling people they could be saved by a great war leader, a king knowing the secret of the bright blade, himself a war wielder of one. He exhorted the people to bestir themselves and prepare, wasting no time in finding their leader. No man among the people knew the mysteries of the bright blade except Habaris, but he was not a man of battle, and Herthu was not highborn among them. So they talked long, and they talked in tangles, failing to resolve the issue. It was then decided. Each should go his own way, but they should meet at the same place again at the next full moon, when Guidon would be able to help with their decisions. When Edelvar returned to his encampment, he was no longer hesitant about the marriage of his daughter, ordering that it should take place forthwith. But he stipulated that Habaris must initiate him and his sons into the mysteries of the bright blade immediately. This being agreed, arrangements for the marriage were put in hand. Habaris and Clara were married, and Edelvar and his sons partially initiated into the mysteries of the bright blade. For the king was told it would take some time for the initiation to be completed. So when they next went to the meeting place, Edelvar was proclaimed the war leader, with his sons to follow according to their ages, should he fall in battle. But Habaris had spoken to Guidon, and secret matters were arranged so that the sons of the Edelvar fall, then Herthu would become the battle chief. The king and those with him returned to their home compound where they were to prepare battlemen, but Herthu was to go back to the gathering place and there train fighting men in the battle tactics which brought them clashing into the fore. Now on their wedding night, when they had retired to their bower, Clara burst into tears and fell weeping with her head on the knees of Habaris, confessing she was not a virgin and had deceived him, begging his forgiveness. Habaris raised her up and said, "Even the wisest of men becomes a fool when his heart blinds him to reason. The older the fool, the bigger the fool." He did not question her regarding love, for he knew she could not love and deceive him. She had given her heart and with it her virginity to another. Yet he made an excuse for her to himself, thinking that she had not willfully deceived him, but had acted out of duty to her father. Also, truly loving someone and wishing to demonstrate that love, she necessarily had to sacrifice the happiness and content, the self-respect of her husband-to-be. The choice had been hers to make. It is ever so. Habaris asked if her father had known how things were, and she said, "He suspected, for am I not his daughter?" Thus Habaris found himself tied to an unloving wife, for he chose to disregard the custom of the people. He wondered, was she also to be an undutiful and unfaithful one? A woman reserves herself for her husband, or she does not, according to her marriage criterion. A woman reserved for marriage is one unlikely to be unfaithful. A woman easily come by before marriage is no less attainable afterwards. For if she says love is the criterion, then she measures by something understandardized, which may figuratively vary from 1 inch to a mile. A man declaring his love may have seduction in mind or a lifetime of protective devotion. The marriage proposal determines the difference and establishes the intent. After the marriage, the king showed little concern for Habaris, for he kept Clara's young battleman in his retinue when he should have dispatched him elsewhere. Nor did Clara maintain the restraint and decorum which dignifies wifehood, except in her outward manifestations, which is no more than a deceptive crust disguising the polluted love beneath. Thus Habaris bore the shame of belittlement in the eyes of men, for Clara was furtively unfaithful. Habaris visited Herthu and on his return told the king that he and his sons would not receive their final initiation. So having made preparations, they set off, accompanied by Clara, to the place of the thunderstones. This being a deeply cleft mountain wherein there was a large cavern from which flowed a river. Entering the cave, Habaris told those within to bide where they were, for only Edelvar, his sons, and Clara were to accompany him into the place of initiation. A small cave entered through a long narrow passage closed off by a heavy door and lit by fire already prepared, a fire which burnt tardily with a blue flame. When a length of time had passed, those who waited without grew uneasy. But it was long before they approached the door, and when they did their throats were seized. So they were affrighted and fled, and one among them died. Then those who knew the mysteries of the thunderstones came and cleared the way, and all within the cave were found dead. Habaris did what had to be done, for though it is well for men to conform to the laws of men, there is a superlaw by which men who are men should live and which sometimes decrees that they must die. Herthu married the daughter of Edelvar, and they had a son who died in his 7th year. Edelvar's daughter died in childbirth. The invaders came and were defeated with a great slaughtering, and Herthu became the first king over all the people of Caucasus. Chapter 8. Guinevere. Maeva, one time wife of Daddam, found refuge among people of Ardis, where she gave birth to Guinevere, the cuckoo child. But as the child grew, it was seen that she had red hair. Though all knew there were fair-haired and dark-haired people, none had ever seen anyone with red hair. Also, strange maladies had manifested in Ardis, for which the strangers were blamed. Therefore, because of these things, Maeva and her child were driven out. They came to a pool near the border of Caucasus and built a habitation of reeds, living there for many years. However, Maeva was killed by a wild beast and Guinevere was left alone. But she learned much from familiars who came to her, and so she became a sorceress. Time went by, and the half-folk, called Yoslings, began to gather around her habitation, and they thought she was a goddess and worshipped her. As her fame spread, word came to Herthu concerning the strange woman. So he sent men to find out about her and report. Guinevere knew about Herthu, but he did not know who she was or that any child of Maeva lived. When Herthu heard the report, he was intrigued and sent men to escort her to him, and she came at his request. They brought her into his presence wearing a cloak of feathers and a garment of doeskin, her hair unbraided like that of other women, falling outside the cloak almost to her knees. He was amazed at the cascade of red hair, and his heart was stirred by her beauty. Herthu gave Guinevere a bower and attendants, but she preferred to be attended by yoslings, whom the people entered her bower. Yet her bearing was modest and maidenly, the yoslings showing her every form of respect. It was the season of fruitfulness, and when Herthu went to the gathering place, he took Guinevere with him. But the yoslings could not be taken there. So they remained behind, but the people removed them. When they arrived at the gathering place, and Guidon saw Guinevere, he was startled, for he had seen such a woman in the darkened waters, but he welcomed her, and was surprised at her wisdom and skill at sorcery. When the time came for Guidon to prophesy, and all who came to hear him were gathered about, they became apprehensive. For his coming forth was delayed, and the moon began to disappear, eaten away by the blackness of the night. Then when they started to jostle and flee, there was a great shout, and Guidon appeared. As he did, a great fire sprang up on either side of him. The people remained, for each was rooted to the place where he stood. Guidon spoke at length, telling them that the night sky sign heralded a new era. That as the moon again grew in brightness, so should their race wax strong and virile, spreading wide across the face of the earth, driving lesser races before them. That a son of Herthu would lead their sons out of Caucasus, and his sons and their sons would continue westwardly towards Hesperus, meaning the land of the spirits. That there they would meet their final destiny. He told them that there would be a great bloodletting, when brother would fight with brother and father with son, but that this would be the planting of the centropole, around which the framework for the structure of their race would be woven. He said, "I shall go before the vanguard in spirit." Later, Herthu asked Guidon to cast the omen sticks and read the ashes, as he wished to know the things concerning Guinevere. This Guidon did, telling him that she was his fate mate, one destined to be his wife, that she was indeed a true maiden, and he would not be forbidden. He said, "She acts as she does through innocence and not through brashness." But what Guidon told Herthu was no more than a grain in the grain sack among all that which he knew and saw. When Herthu returned to his homeside, he paid court to Guinevere and asked her to marry him. And this she consented to do after 1 year. The people, hearing what was intended, were displeased and murmured against the marriage, saying it was unseemingly for their king to marry a sorceress, and one strange in so many ways. Also, there was a custom forbidding the intermingling of blood, but there was no doubt as to what she was, some thinking she was one who could be acceptable. Guinevere was not the bloodkin of Herthu, so as the marriage would not be incestuous, Guinevere decided she would say nothing of their relationship. For she was in love with him, and her love was ever ready to make excuses. Yet, despite her knowledge and wisdom, her heart was full of fears because of her background. But she displayed none of these anxieties. She did not feel at ease among the people, but never asked the yoslings be allowed back. She tried to become acceptable by ministering to the sick with simples and remedies, but the more she cured and healed, the more people feared her. And fearing, they shunned her, except they were in dire need of her help. However, Herthu remained firm in his resolve to marry, though many advised that if he simply took Guinevere as a concubine or as something less than a wife, it would be more acceptable. They said, none would object if she were treated as a woman with no standing, but mates do not marry, for marriage would grant her undue status, and is marriage so necessary? Does a wise man buy the pie whereof he can freely eat at any time? Such sayings enraged Herthu, For he knew Guinevere to be a woman reserving for marriage, and this he tried to tell the people. But they laughed, saying, "She has bewitched you. Put her to the test." But he replied, "This is unworthy, for it displays doubt and distrust. A virgin is a virgin, whether named so by horn or wand, and remains so whatever the conjectures of carnal-minded men who are more familiar with women of lesser repute." Yet whether the marriage bar applied was still a thing of doubt in the minds of many, for none knew the lineage of Guinevere, nor did she enlighten anyone, though it was customary to recite this at the betrothal. But Herthu and Guinevere remained unbetrothed, though the forthcoming marriage was made known. Now the nephews and kin of Edelvar nurtured seeds of discord among the people, and because it was a time of peace when the skills of a war chief were not needed, so it developed that there were those for Herthu and those against him. Then Herthu said to the people, Let this not be something to cut people apart, but something which can be decided at the next folk feast. The seed sowing time had passed, but it was not yet harvest tide, and the young men held spear-throwing contests and tested each other in many manly skills. At such times, seated on a platform against the palisade, Herthu gave judgment and awarded merits. Inside the palisade was a walkway in places from which great stones could be hurled, and from one such place came a murderous weapon which cut down through Herthu's head to pierce the shoulder of his shield arm, striking him to the ground. Immediately there was a great tumult and confusion. Fighting broke out and men died, but Herthu was carried to safety in the bower of Guinevere. There he was protected by his retainers, but within the palisade all was taken over by those hostile to Herthu. Before the cowardly blow, those for Herthu had been more numerous and powerful, but after he was so sorely wounded, they were less. And of these men, many were inclined to waver, for such is the nature of man. But to contrast with the frail reeds who wavered, those who remained loyal were resolute, for this too is the nature of man. Now when Guinevere and the wise men attended to Herthu, they saw that while the shield arm had been injured, it was not unfeeling, for it grasped the hand of Guinevere. But this the sword arm could not do, though it was uninjured. Therefore they knew the slaughter-bent weapon was charmed, and no woman could remove such enchantment, nor could the wise men, for they were unblooded. In the days that followed, the enchantment caused demons to enter through the wound and to take up their abode. So Herthu was tormented and his body racked before subsiding into the quietness which precedes death. The demons had abused Guinevere and called her foul names and cried out in loud voices against people so that they should abandon their king. The place where Herthu lay was near the lakeside, and in the lake was an island called Inscris, meaning Isle of the Dead, where those about to die were taken, as well as the dead, before being consigned to the waters. For the people believed that those given into the lake went straight into awareness in the other world, while anyone buried on land was only half aware upon arrival and remained half awake and half asleep for many years. So those loyal to Herthu carried him down to the boats and accompanied him and Guinevere to the isle, and they were not molested, for none interfered with those mourning the dead. On the isle were priests and 9 holy maidens who attended to the rites, while other women ministered to the newly dead. But Herthu was dead, though halfway across the threshold. When Herthu arrived, he was placed in the hospice house where Guinevere attended to him. Gwydion opened Herthu's skull where it had been cleft and let out the demon which had taken up habitation there. And he brewed powerful potions which removed the enchantment. When after many days he departed, Herthu was no longer at the door of death, though weak and in many ways like a baby. While Herthu lay so sorely stricken, the kinsfolk of Edelvar were disputing among them. While Herthu lay so sorely stricken, the kinsfolk of Edelvar were disputing among themselves, and this led to fighting and battles. But none came near the isle to harm Herthu, because it was a sacred place and gave him sanctuary. When it came to the time of the folk feast, there was a great battle at the gathering place of Gwydion. When it came to the time of the folk feast, there was a great battle at the gathering place, and Gwydion was slain. There came a day when Herthu, though still not whole, could move about, and then he and Guinevere departed with those who remained with them. They were married before leaving their isle of sanctuary, and they fled to a place far off where, as the years went by, Herthu became whole again, and Guinevere gave birth to sons and daughters. It was a good place, fertile and well watered, and so they prospered. But there came a time of drought, when the waters dried up and their flocks died. So Herthu sent men to Caucasus, and these came back saying that there too the land was stricken and people distressed. He also sent others to the west, and they returned, saying that there the land was not stricken, but the people would not accept them, except with spears. Herthu then sent men back to Caucasus to tell people there of the plenty which lay to the west, and there they came back with a war band led by Itylus, and many people followed. Herthu could no longer bear weapons, and his sons were as yet young and unblooded. Therefore he gave his 2 sons who were of sufficient age into the keeping of Itylus, so that they may learn the art of war. And they followed him loyally, becoming men of valor in the conflict which ensued. Many people left Caucasus and settled in the land lying to the west, and Herthu and Guinevere also settled there. Time passed, and Herthu became renowned for his wisdom, and Itylus, king of Arania, honored him with lands and servants. Herthu's 2 sons, who had followed the king and were twins, married the king's 2 eldest daughters, who were also twins. This caused problems, for the king, though having 3 wives, was sonless. Therefore the twin sons of Herthu became his heirs. The king was perplexed, for the 2 men could not rule together, and both were of equal standing in his eyes. Yet it was the king's duty to nominate his heirs and proclaim him to the people, so there should be no division after his death. Therefore Itylus consulted Herthu as to how the judgment should be made, and Herthu said, "Let fate decree who shall be king." In Arania, the people gathered 4 times a year for the folk feasts. At such times, it was customary for new laws to be proclaimed, judgments given, and all courteousness issues settled. So before the next folk feast, Herthu prepared a man-made stone from sand, clay, and other things. And while it was still soft, he set the hilt of his great sword, Dislana the bitter biter, into it. And when the stone was hardened, Dislana was fast. The sword-implanted stone was then set down near the place where the king gave judgment. Around it was drawn a wide circle bisected across. On the day when the people were first assembled to hear his words, Itylus told them of the perplexity over the problem occurring between the twin sons of Herthu and his daughters. On the day when the people were first assembled to hear his words, Itylus told them of his perplexity over the problem concerning the twin sons of Herthu and his daughters. He said, "So the people are not divided, and the kingdom rent by strife. It is well this matter be settled now. Therefore I am setting a fair test involving no men other than these 2 whom I hold equally dear. Whichsoever of them shall remove their father's great weapon from this stone, so he frees it and grasps the hilt, shall become my lawful heir, with the other being to him as a younger brother. They will each try in turn during the duration of the fall of a feather, the first trier being the one who casts his bracelet over the blade. Then each of Herthu's sons were placed in a spot where the bisecting line joined the circle. So they stood opposite each other, and each had 3 bracelets. They threw until each one encircled the blade with his bracelet. Then this one tried to withdraw the weapon with his hand, but could not because of the sharpness. The other tried by placing his 2 palms on each side of the blade, then pressing them together while lifting, but he could not move it either. The first one tried again, copying what he had just been done more powerfully, so the stone almost lifted off the ground, but the sword did not leave the stone. Then the other approached the stone, but this time he put his hands under the edges of the stone, so he could lift it in his arms, and he dashed it down over a rock which was nearby, so it broke asunder. He then picked Dislana up by the hilt and brandished it over his head. The people acclaimed him while his brother grasped his arms in congratulations. Thus, by the wisdom was the problem overcome.
Yeah, what? The weather. Very peculiar, don't you think? You heard the sword and the stone, right? Welcome back. It was interesting. Was it not interesting? So that's book 1. That was book 1 of the Kolbrin Bible. If you weren't able to pick up on corresponding elements and throughout that entire reading, you've been living under a rock, which I applaud you for, because at this point in time, living under a rock is probably your best bet to have a fulfilling and enjoyable life from start to finish. It's weird out here, man. It would be nice to actually, can I come over? Can I come hang out with you under your rock? Because there's nothing more than I would rather do right now than make under a rock in the forest with, by candlelight and music. You know what I mean? So, thanks. Stay under your rock. Turn this video off. Don't ever turn it back on. Go back to your rock. Leave us crazy people to be crazy. Thanks you guys for being here. Please, if you made it this far, hit the like button. Hit the subscribe. Hit the subscribe button. Leave a comment. Let me know where you're listening from. What was your favorite part? Was there something noteworthy in here that sparked an epiphany, an epiphany moment? Share. That's why we are here. We are here to share. My channel is designed to be, like a tavern that everyone crowds into after hours because it's dark and cold and stormy outside, and you leave your muddy shoes at the door and you ask the hostess for a pint of ale, and you just tell stories around the table, and you merry-make. There's a jester somewhere in the room. There's some lads in the corner playing some tunes and shit. That's where you're at right now. Thanks for being here. Thanks for making it what it is. I'll provide the container, and you guys got to fill it with your magic. All right? So thank you again for being here. My name's Keith, your man of letters, here to bring you knowledge, information, and entertainment. And sit tight for book 2. All right, take it easy.